My name is Mertat Hariri, and I am CEO and President of the Canadian Science Policy Centre, and would like to welcome you all to yet another interesting panel presented by CSPC this year. This panel is on innovating for a digital future, navigating economic shifts and global challenges. First, I want to do the land acknowledgement. I am talking to you from Newmarket, Ontario, which is the traditional land and unceded territory of Wenda, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe peoples who have lived and worked here for thousands of years. This panel specifically is organized in collaboration with the ICTC, the Information and Communication Technology Council, and we are pleased and proud to have collaborated with our colleagues in the council and look forward to do more collaborations. The panel is part of the CSPC Innovation Strategy Project started last year with a number of consultation sessions and panel series that we are presenting this year. I just want to remind you that the next panel of this series will be on agri-food sector and will be presented on May 21st at the same time at noon. The context for this panel is the fact that global economy shaped or shaken by profound shifts in economic structures, geopolitical dynamics, and a big part of it is to do the advancement of digital technologies, from artificial intelligence to quantum computing and wide range of applications, digital IDs, blockchain, cybersecurity, and other challenges that we are facing. And so we are at the transformation era. The impacts of these are profound and altering wide range of our economies, labor markets, and others, even leading to geopolitical shift themselves. So we are perhaps entering into an uncharted and unknown zones. This virtual panel brings together industry leaders, policymakers from Canada and Europe to explore the challenges and opportunities presented by these challenging landscape and discuss specifically two issues, but others as well. How can government and business adapt to the acceleration of digital transformation at the same time that ensuring the economic stability and security? And what policies and frameworks are needed to foster innovation, enhance global trade, and build resilient economies? We have a fantastic lineup of speakers here, which will discuss this. First, I want to introduce to you the moderator of this session, and as well as the CEO and President of the ICTC Council, Namir Anani. Namir is a leading strategist in Canada's digital economy with executive roles in both public and private sectors. He brings deep expertise in policy, tech innovation, and global partnerships. By the way, I have summarized the bios because they all very accomplished individuals. Full bios are posted on CSPC website and on the event page. We are fortunate to have the speakers and panelists, John Wiglet from Microsoft. He is a National Technology Officer at Microsoft Canada. John drives his strategic policy and tech efforts to foster innovation. He helps individuals and organizations innovate with technology while mitigating potential risks. He is a seasoned expert in technology evolution and also enjoys cider brewing and cylinder travel. The next panelist is Anne-Marie Thompson, a friend of CSPC, now acting Vice President of Research, Grants, and Scholarships at NSERC. Anne-Marie champions discovery research and advocates for innovation and knowledge and nurtures the next generation and brings science to forefront of society. With over 23 years in public service, she has led national and global science initiatives and holds bachelor's and master's degree in environmental engineering. The next panelist will be Suman Roy. Suman leads Tata Consulting Services Canada, managing 9,700 plus team working to develop innovative IT solutions and spearheading digital transformation. With more than 30 years of experience in the firm, he actively promotes education and skills development and services on the board of ICTC, as well as he's an active member of the Business Council of Canada and a CEO advisor for Canada-India Business Council. And the last but certainly not the least, a special guest, Yvette Vera-Perez, CEO of the Organization of Canadian Nuclear Industries. Yvette brings 20 years of expertise in the energy, clean tech, and sustainability sectors. She previously led the Canadian Hydrogen Association, and her expertise spans strategic planning, business development, and advancing low-carbon solutions through multi-stakeholder collaborations. She holds a Master of Applied Science from the University of British Columbia and an MBA from McGill University. So without any further ado, thank you very much, everyone, for being with us today. But without any further ado, I want to turn to Namir as the moderator of sessions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mehrdad. It is certainly my sincere pleasure to be here today and to dialogue and exchange on a subject of interest to all of us, and that is innovation in an era of rapidly changing or evolving environment, and where technology continues to disrupt industries faster than economies can adjust, and where digital today is not only powering the economy, it is the economy. But before I start, I would like to acknowledge that since I'm moderating this panel from Ottawa, that we are on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here dates back to time immemorial. So to set the discussion into context and to add on what Mehrdad mentioned, I think we live in an era of rapid disruption that demands our full attention. When you look at it from the changing trade dynamics that we see every day, to climate change, to cyber threats, health risk, and changing labor market, all of these come against the backdrop of digital technologies that are redefining the very boundaries of what's possible. And in fact, ultimately, how we embrace this reality, it's going to define the trajectory of our economy in the next number of years and help us at the same time tackle the productivity gap, but also tackle the commercialization aspect that, or the commercialization deficit that we need to address in the number of years. But ultimately, if we look at the innovation aspect, it is the cornerstone of any high-performing economy. And some would argue that it is the enabling technologies that drive innovation. And others would say, well, hold on, it is the research and development aspect that is important. Others would say, well, don't forget the talent. The talent is the most critical component of all of that. And others would say, well, what about the energy demands that we need as an economy, specifically in an increasingly digital space that we need to drive? And ultimately, how do we take innovation to market? How do we commercialize all of this going forward? So today is a rare opportunity for us to dialogue with experts in this space, as highlighted earlier by Mehrdad, and to delve a little bit more into what is the realm of possible? What are the possible, what are the policies that are needed for Canada to set the stage and assert its leadership in the digital space, specifically in this global, very competitive landscape? So how will this panel roll out is that I will give each panelist about 3 to 5 minutes to provide their insight on the issue, to set the stage for the Q&A and help us weave in the discussion. And after we've gone through the 4 panelists, we will start the Q&A. And around 1:15 or 1:10, we will ask for any questions from the audience. That will be delighted to have the panel respond to that. And by all means, I will ask the panelists, if you have questions of each other, please ask them. That will add to the value of the discussion that we're having today. So with that in mind, and maybe I can start with you, John, if you can set the stage for the 3 to 5 minutes.
Thanks, Namir and Merdad. It's a pleasure to be here to chat with you. And I'd like to echo the points of, we're at a critical juncture of our nation as we look at the international stage of things. And this point of inflection has caused a lot of people to reflect upon the prosperity of our nation. And I hearken back to the Institute for Competitiveness and Prosperity that looked at Canada's prosperity gap. And they suggested that the prosperity gap is a productivity gap, and we've been talking about Canada's productivity for decades, it seems. And the productivity gap is an innovation gap. And so we really need to innovate across the 5 innovation outcomes, not only the new to world products, but those evolution of products, getting new customers, and even driving efficiencies. It turns out that Canadian organizations, businesses invest pennies on the dollar on advanced technologies. And many are comfortable maintaining the status quo. And so they're slow to adopt technology. I was surprised to learn when I went to the Stats Canada site that only 6% of Canadian businesses have adopted artificial intelligence to produce goods and services. AI promises to collapse that productivity gap or address the productivity gap. And yet we're not seeing that adoption. And we need to then drive that dissemination of these tools. This is not just artificial intelligence from a model and a data perspective. This is adoption across communities. Recently, Jeffrey Ding, a professor at George Washington University, authored a book called Technology and the Rise of Great Powers. And he proposes that the most important element of long-term growth of a nation is how quickly and broadly they disseminate general purpose technologies. So think back to the motors, the gasoline engine, think back to electricity and the dissemination and how that really spurred on that economic growth. AI, cloud, quantum, all promise to really help drive the economic engine of a nation. Now, when we think about the economic engine of Canada, 98% of businesses have less than 100 people. And so how do we encourage those businesses to adopt these tools? 55% have less than 4 people. And so we need to size our messaging for all those communities so that we can disseminate those technologies. Maybe I can close on this idea of, look, Canada, we are a very fortunate nation. We live in a great place, but we have 36 million people. And that's the tax base that we have that funds some of those great longer term activities. We can't do it all. We need to pick our spaces. And so we need to provide that focus. Consider how Canada shows up very strong in the space technologies. We have a great space industry and doing lots of innovation, but we're not playing across the board, not building rocket engines, not sending our own rockets to space. So we're having partnerships with others to help us then aspire to those great capabilities. And so as we look towards the future, let's pick our spaces. Let's engage with those partners and then grow by disseminating these tools to everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. You've triggered so many things in my mind for questions as we go through the panel. Maybe Anne-Marie, if I can ask you to provide your insights, your initial insights on the issue.
Sure. Thanks very much, Namir. And yes, picking up on many of John's points there. So very well articulated by both Namir and John about the challenges. So I'll take the opportunity to speak a little bit from a granting council perspective and what we're able to do in the space as well. Of course, NSERC plays a critical role in connecting researchers and academic and industrial partners. That whole tech transfer aspect or commercialization aspect of bringing out innovation in academia to industry is an important factor here as well. And so we think about things like the development of entrepreneurial mindsets in the research community. We think about, we're able to have policies as well around open science and research data management plans, which are encouraging the open sharing of resources. To John's point about needing to accelerate some of this work, needing to do this in partnership with other countries and other sectors. So, some of our levers are the direct programming, but they're also some of the policies that we're then able to encourage, if you will, encourage universities and colleges that who are, who we work primarily with to be able to foster that kind of sharing and growth. Of course, I would be very remiss if I didn't speak to the importance of talent. And we know that talent is this critical vector by which tech transfer and knowledge mobilization happens. Specifically, my context again is primarily from a research environment to a company, and that can be some of the fastest ways through the talent is to get those ideas through. To John's point again about adoption, right? How do you encourage rapid adoption of different tools and technologies into industry? So that's kind of the angle from which I'm coming from to today's panel, but really, really happy to be here with such an esteemed colleagues, and thank you for the opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Great points that you raised. Sumin, maybe I'll go to you next for your insights.
Thank you, Namir. And it's not only just a privilege, but I think it's a huge personal learning opportunity for me to be with such a panel and in such a forum. I think I echo what Anne-Marie just said, picking out John's points as well. We have a country which is so rich in possibilities. I think the major issue is possibility to practice. That is what we need to focus. So much has been said about Canada's productivity problem. I think productivity is an output, and sometimes we tend to miss on the input side of it. Let me share some statistics to portray that where we are today and what maybe we need to focus on. And John has rightly said, referring to the book, that a technology is the key for any nation's excellence and success in today's context. And more so for countries for whom the geographical size might be big, but the potential of that 36 or 40 million tax base is a condition which has to be taken into consideration. But look at this outlay of how we do it. If I take the research and innovation, what Namir was alluding to, if I take the top 5 countries like Israel, Sweden, Finland, Taiwan, more than 5% of their GDP, and extends up to 7%, goes into research and development. And where are we? Less than 2%. If that is a thing which needs to be addressed at a policy level for sure, look at the output side of it. If I take the last maybe 8 to 10 years, on an average, China and US have filed roughly 50,000 patents. And then talk about the practice, while roughly about 20% of the patents of that 50,000 number has been approved for US, it is about 70% of that 50,000 has been approved for China. So one is the policy part of it, how much we are laying focus on the investment side for research and development. And then on the practice side of it, how much you're effectively converting that for commercialization, for democratization, and for common purpose usage technology, as John was alluding to. It's not that we don't have it. We also have filed about 3,000 to 4,000 patents. But possibly it is not in the right place. Maybe we need to be more effective. If I take another Statistics Canada's own publication, in the last 20 years, the job growth in Canada has been more than 200% cumulative for healthcare and related professions. Keeping aside healthcare and related, everything else has grown less than half of that. So is my research and development putting my money in the right place for a maximal effort and democratization? That's on the next stage of the policies. Having said that, we possibly have the best ecosystem for producing the talent, because that is a third element in this game, that how the talent will play out in today's context and retooling and reskilling in future context. We do have that input side of it. Maybe we need a framework, maybe we need to look deep into this to maximize the output benefit of this. A classic example, the government of Canada has announced about $700 million for AI adoption or AI enablement. Now, when you go deep into this $700 million, a majority of that will go into hardware compute part of it. It will not go in promoting or exciting the research and development by small institutions and the technology frameworks that we have. So there is investment, and there is more need to be done for sure. But even the distribution of that will determine how that output gets into the common stream or the common citizens' life and the excellence of Canada's mission. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Suman. You raise an interesting question, and I'm sure I'm going to get back to you on that with R&D investment of under 2%, which is, you're right, compared to Germany and Israel and others, there are in the 4 to 4.5%. But that's a combination of both government investment and industry put into the R&D. So how do we entice also, apart from the government, how do we entice the industry to do that? It's a larger question that we need to address. And maybe we'll get back to you on this with that question. Yvette, if I can go to you for your insights.
Thank you, Namir, and thank you, CSPC, and actually all my colleagues who have made a few very interesting points. I have been taking some notes. Let me first start talking from the perspective of industry collaboration and policy support. And this is a great panel example. We come from different areas. We look at things slightly differently, but that's how we collaborate. That's how we learn from each other. I'm representing the nuclear supply chain in Canada through OCNI. Most of our members, over 250, would be, just as Jean was saying, SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. So how do we help them? How do we help them bring that top talent so that they can innovate? This is the large cohort of employers in Canada is SMEs. So how do we help them to stay current and to deliver on the, if I'm thinking from the perspective of energy and the needs of data centers. Now, from the policy side, I would say that that every industry, but I'm thinking from the perspective of the energy industry, it's really important because a lot of the planning is very much long-term. We need that collaboration between federal and provincial government. So we need that long-term visibility, and that's crucial for the industry to thrive, for investment to come in. We've talked about innovation and infrastructure. So how do we get that innovation quickly into the companies so that they can improve productivity, etc.? That's like someone like Anne-Marie through NSERC would come in. How do we deploy that talent, and how do we enable work integrated learning into industry so that these are not theoretical learnings, but actually practical learnings that have a bottom line impact? And then how do we as industry work as close as possible with government, right? To ensure that policies are aligned, policies don't work at cross purpose, and we think about what is the North Star, where is it where we want to be as a country, where do we want to lead in 3, 5, 10 years from now, and how do we get there, right? From the perspective of the nuclear industry in Canada, for example, this is a $22 billion per year industry. It's an industry with lots of experience. Fortunately, Canadians have high trust in nuclear power due to a long history of strong performance, reputable regulators in the country, right? So when you think about 89,000 jobs in operations and services, in research and development, there's a lot of R&D that happens in this industry. How can we do better? How can we actually position to serve that big increase in energy demand, data centers, transportation, advanced manufacturing? I was just looking at some data from the IEA, specifically in data centers. They were pointing out that global electricity demand in data centers will increase by more than double in 2030. What that means is, John, you may want to fact check me here, but the number I read was 945 terawatt hours, right? If you bring it down a little bit more to Canada, what does that mean? Right now, 1% of Canada's electricity would be devoted to data center. But if all these projects go ahead and succeed, and we want those projects, right, that the energy needs could be a lot larger. So my thought and the thought in the industry is, how do we, with this anticipated growth, how do we develop the projects and the infrastructure needed so that we can meet those demands? And how do we do it in a way that is, of course, carbon free, and that allows for scalability, flexibility, location versatility? I think we were having a chat earlier with John about that. So, but you don't do that in isolation. You do that in collaboration with groups like this one, and everyone thinking about the common goal and helping each other out.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yvette, for this. You've highlighted a lot of areas that we need to tackle as well, and part of the discussion. Maybe, John, I will start with the first questions to you. It's a larger question, but it really builds on what you mentioned. How is AI and in the future quantum computing is and will be changing Canada's economy, and how do we assert ourselves digitally in terms of adoption and productivity improvement? What do we have to do, basically? What are the catalysts to get to that stage?
Well, thanks for that, and I apologize for interrupting you before you finished. But one of the guiding lights, I think, to describe this change that we see happening is a book by Agarwal, Gaines, and Goldfarb, Power Prediction. Three professors at U of T, the Creative Destruction Lab, and they talk about the adoption of general-purpose technologies, starting with point solutions, application solutions, and then systemic change. And we see this happening in Canada in the larger organizations around point solutions and application solutions starting to roll out using AI. So in the banks, they're replacing the fraud prevention, anti-money laundering with machine learning. We see things like co-pilots or GPTs coming into productivity suites. But that systemic change is going to take some time as we look across the rule sets. And some of these rules are pretty complex. I was working with an organization that was looking to develop small modular reactors, nuclear reactors that are containable. And we have great plans here in the province of Ontario to build one of those out. And we were thinking about how do we do predictive maintenance using AI on those solutions. And it turned out that we couldn't because you need to do all your processing on the site. Because it's a safety critical system. And so, we can quite have an understanding around pumps being safety critical, but employment and staffing management could be deemed to be safety critical. And so we need to be able to unwind some of the legacy rules and regulations to allow people to use those tools. I think the other piece is, again, on the adoption side, we're fortunate at Microsoft that we were able to use quantum capabilities and quantum algorithms to design a new battery that uses 70% less lithium than traditional batteries. And this is just using these nascent stages of quantum. Are other organizations in Canada looking at that? Are they trying to build this out? We haven't had a lot of traction with organizations that are asking, hey, how do I use these tools and how do I build those out? And so we need to find those spots and we need to pick our spots. The last piece I would mention is, Suman mentioned that investment in AI, the $700 million or the $2 billion investment in AI compute. Doesn't make sense for Canada to invest that $2 billion into commodity compute? Or do we invest it in today's compute to help employ the skills, like build those skills for university grads so they know what a high performance backplane looks like in a data center? And do we invest in tomorrow's technology? So build out quantum AI capabilities so that we can leapfrog the existing environment and build what's next. And then be able to do that. And so I think those are questions that we need to ask ourselves as we look at these technologies and how we can, own the podium going forward.
But John, do you think, let me add to it, do you think that there is an investment aspect that we need to something? I mean, when you look at south of the borders, putting with Stargate 500 billion, France is putting 109 billion euro into AI compute on that. How do we match that? Although it's there's a lot of discussion that maybe things could be done differently. But your thoughts on that?
I don't think we can match it. And so I think we need to pick our spots. Suman mentioned earlier where percentages of GDP were spent on R&D. And Israel is a favorite example of mine. They've invested in cybersecurity, and they picked their spots for cybersecurity, and they've become a cybersecurity powerhouse globally. For quantum, they've decided quantum sensing is their sweet spot, and that's where they're investing. And so that's where they're moving. I talked with the province that felt they were late to the AI game. And they said, John, help us really put a spotlight on our region for AI. And I asked them to think about what would draw and attract people from around the world to come to that location to be able to do the work that they do. And so plant that flag in the application of AI towards some tough business problem. And we came up with this idea of AI for the environment. Canada is well known for our vast open spaces, our environment, our environmental sensibilities. What if we planted that flag and said, if you're doing something for the environment using AI, come to our region. We're going to have a startup ecosystem that's going to support you, researchers, grants, industry. Because when I look at my company, and we have the good fortune to be able to invest in any one of 190 countries around the world, when the little spinner comes up and says, Canada, John, what do you have for us today? I want to be able to stand up and say, you can only do this in Canada because we have the best talent, the best ecosystems, and the most straightforward way to commercialize than any other nation in the world. And I think that will be key.
Excellent. Yeah, we have to pick our game. You're absolutely right. Suman, maybe just building on what you mentioned and what John also alluded to on research and development, where other countries are spending more percentage per GDP than we are. But as I mentioned earlier, that's a combination of the government spend, but also the industry. Apart from the government, how do we entice the industry? And obviously there is a challenge there because 98% of our industries are very small and micro. How do we entice that investment?
So let me talk about two dimensions. Let me left shift away what John has just said. AI and quantum. So let's talk the AI and the quantum because that's an exponential domain as of now. But even if you look into the AI adoption, alluding to the previous point I made in the investments, government has to play a very key role. So one part of this AI adoption, which is governmental, is mostly inward focus. And the other part of it is, which is institutional adoption, is more of a market focus. Definitely an export focus, because that's our economy. Now let's address the second point. To John's point, can I not build an energy center of excellence, AI powered in Canada, that can be exported as an IP outside? Can I not build an agriculture center of excellence? And why I'm saying this, because these are our strengths. Not many countries I know of, at least in my data set, that more than 55% of energy produced in the country is from hydroelectric. So talk about green energy. We already have an ecosystem where we can substantiate that, but that also puts us on a responsibility to certain investments on research and development and AI to take that charter further so that, like John said, I can go to any other country and say, you should come to see how AI-enabled green energy is produced in Canada. Similarly, for food production, I think that is one of the best kept secrets at how we do agriculture. We do not dig the soil too much compared to many other countries where you have to do for productivity and necessity. So there are areas which is market-centric, which the investment can go in, but has to be underscored by the government and championed by the government to an extent. But come to the other part of it, that what can government do for its citizens, which will increase in a way the productivity as well. I was alluding to healthcare. The accessibility and the affordability of the healthcare can only be reached the optimal, common purpose level if it is AI enabled. Otherwise, it cannot. There are 10 other areas in citizen service where we can directly today start adopting AI in a much vigorous way to make it more productive, more resilient, and much more affordable and accessible. We do have constitutional, and for whatever reason, provincial versus federal barriers, because we need to put that into perspective as well when we design something. But you talk about biometric identity, my favorite subject. It is so fragmented. you talk about healthcare, you talk about education. And now there are initiatives being taken because out of compulsion, out of necessity that we need to do it. But AI actually can improve tenfold the citizen service that government today provides. And that being said, it is a part of the supply chain. So if I infuse AI into this, automatically as a downstream impact on the small and medium institutions, they start adopting it. Because if I say, okay, I will administer a primary healthcare in a remote area through a virtual setup promoted by the government, my supply ecosystem start developing towards that. So the involuntary adoption of the AI will, to a degree, solve this problem of small and medium businesses not being affordable to spend that much on adopting new technologies.
Excellent. Still the question of the research and R&D, but that we'll come back to it. That question. There's so many. Every time you add some thoughts from all of you, it raises a lot of more questions. Maybe I'll go to you, Anne-Marie, this time. We talked about the commercialization aspect, so it would be good to hear how NSERC is helping the startup community and SMEs in Canada that we talked about to help them commercialize their innovations going forward, given that, we do, apart from the productivity gap, we have a commercialization deficit. We are seen as a country of research, but not as a country of industrialization or application of industrialization. How is NSERC helping bridge that gap?
Sure, great. Thank you. Thank you for that question. So yeah, so of course at speak again of NSERC, but of course the Tri-Council, we're supporting not just the generation of knowledge, but also can be deployed as a strategic tool to de-risk innovation. And so we do this through our different partnership programs. I see Terry Ross is on the call here as well from the college sector. So we really, our biggest levers, of course, are programming to try and help bridge that gap between academic or applied research and industrial impact. And so we do this specifically around commercialization in a few ways. Understanding that our core mandate is, of course, the support of research and development and maybe a little bit of deployment at times. But we do recognize, of course, as we all do, that critical valley of death. And so we do have, where investment can be more challenging. And so we do have some programming that does seek to, again, reduce the technical and financial risks for industry. We do have our Ideas to Innovation program and our Lab to Market programs. And these are really meant to provide a structured path to bring research from the lab bench to the market shelf, supporting feasibility testing, prototype development. And I was talking earlier about the growing imperative to build an entrepreneurial mindset around research. And so that is also intended to foster that kind of climate or environment. And so we do have strong connections through our programming and the researchers to the SME community, to startups, and also to the major companies in Canada too, who also leverage the programs. So, so I think it was John maybe who made the comment earlier, or Suman, about this idea of like the input side of things, right? So as a granting council, we try to develop innovative programming that's going to help. We of course have the financing to be able to invest in these areas. And then support the talent development. And so I guess we're kind of on the input side, but we do recognize that there's a role where we can to be playing around, bridging that gap. We, of course, have partnerships with organizations like the National Research Council and others around specific technologies to also try and, be a player where it comes to trying to bridge the gap. So, I mean, that's namely how we do it. Our core partnership program, of course, is Alliance, where it's very much around academic partnerships with industry partners and bringing that expertise to bear on an industrial challenge, recognizing, especially with SMEs, that they don't always have that in-house capability to push that research forward. And so it's quite the results are quite impressive when it comes to how the programs and the talent and the access to the academic researchers are able to advance different innovations. So I mean, I'll stop there for now, but that's namely our key levers and how we do that. And we do, as others have mentioned, we recognize that Canada is based on our size and based on our contributions, we recognize that we can't do everything. And so we do also have partnerships where, this kind of choosing areas that are where Canada can really make significant advancements, and also leveraging other countries' advancements as well. So we try and cover a wide array of ways to support talent and commercialization, and bringing the bench scale and the research to the forefront. So multiple thrusts. And again, that idea of the entrepreneurial mindset in the research and the student and talent vector is something that we're thinking more about as well.
That's great. I think absolutely. I think the culture of commercialization is important, and how do we develop it? And obviously, with all the trade dynamics that are happening, where else can we look at? You're absolutely right. The Canadian market's small, but apart from the US, Europe is 450 million people, 19.5 trillion dollar economy per year. It's quite substantive to reflect on. So there are channels that we have to reflect on that. So thank you for that input. Going back to the energy aspect, whether John and you mentioned as well on this, because there's a lot of body of research that indicate that the data centers alone by 2030 will be consuming approximately 8% of the global electricity demand, let alone everything else that's coming on top of it. Are we prepared in Canada? Interestingly, the nuclear industry is considered green, but obviously not renewable, but green. How is the nuclear industry positioning to meet the demands of the future? Because obviously that's part of the components, the building blocks of the digital economy.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Namir. So first, yes, I've looked at figures, 8%, 1%. The point is, it's a very big number. In relative percentages, it might look small, but in absolute numbers, they're very big. So the task is daunting. First, let me talk about what the nuclear industry can do, and then let me talk a little bit about some challenges. So John mentioned he's been working with a number of SMR companies, and this is really interesting because and a relatively more modern phenomenon, if you will. So nuclear can go from smaller scale, as in microreactors, small, to SMRs, small modular reactors, to very large nuclear. And we have all those capabilities in different stages of development in Canada. So what that means is that, in principle, there's three things that the nuclear industry can do for the energy, the increasing energy needs, the data centers, but also other electrification needs. We can start with large nuclear, of course. We have 19 operating reactors in Canada. We have that knowledge through our homegrown technologies. So definitely we have that capability. Does Ontario need to increase? Right now it's 60% of the provinces that nuclear provides, but do we need to increase that number? Absolutely. There's a number of projects on these. Working on this. So scalability and flexibility, we can do big, small modular reactors. We all know about the GE Hitachi project in Darlington, right? That's going to be providing 300 megawatts. So that's considered SMR. But there's also the micro reactors that could produce anything under 10 megawatts, right? So that could be available for, say, remote communities, for mining operations, off-grid application. In my view, my assumption is that data centers are more of an urban phenomenon, but you never know, right? It allows that possibility for locations in other areas that are not necessarily considered urban. So the scalability and flexibility is important. The alignment, of course, that brings us to the alignment with what the data centers may need, 24/7 power, with a minimal carbon footprint. So I'm not going to call it carbon free, but definitely as small as it can be. Obviously, reliability, that's quite important. And then that ability to cope with this growth that you just mentioned, Amir, because of also the scalability and flexibility, which brings then to the location flexibility or versatility that I mentioned, right? John mentioned his conversations with SMR, so we could co-locate those diverse energy sources. I'm talking about nuclear now, closer to the end user, right? That can help reduce transmission losses. It enables regional development, which is an important topic to discuss in Canada. For completeness, if that's all right, I can also mention hydrogen, the partnership of hydrogen and nuclear, and how low carbon hydrogen, I'm not going to call it green because there's a whole kaleidoscope of colors for hydrogen, and technical hydrogen coming from nuclear is considered pink, if you want to talk about colors. But I'm going to call it low carbon. And then hydrogen would offer that flexible, dispatchable molecule that at times is also needed. Sometimes you need the wires, sometimes you need the molecules, and it can allow to decarbonize other sectors as well. And you can't produce hydrogen when the grid demand is low, for example. Then you have a very good storage medium that you can distribute in a picker plant, if we're talking about power, or as a molecule for a number of industries. And then that also frees up electricity capacity from the grid to do other things. So those are the wonderful things that we can do. There's some challenges, and John mentioned one, and that's working with an SMR company and looking at the long lead times required in nuclear projects. And maybe that's where a group like myself can help. All right, how can we learn to navigate the space, but also how can we learn to bring best practices from other industries to modernize our processes and to make them as robust as necessary, but keep them agile, because I would understand that complexity of timing for private companies, it's perhaps not within the scope of what you're willing to work with. So how can we do this together? And I think that may come from the perspective that for the most part, nuclear projects, because they have traditionally been very large, have been contracted by government. So how do we work with the private sector now to become more agile, and maybe that's a space where we can help. The last thing I'm going to say, just so that you think about time, you get a measure of time. It took 10 years to obtain the license for the Darlington project, the new build. So how do we become more agile? I think is something that we can definitely work on together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the CANDU reactors takes a long time to build and design and meet the regulatory aspects on that. But you're describing some new developments in the micro reactors and others that are interesting. Since you talked about color of hydrogen, if I might push on this, because you led the role of hydrogen development, and before coming into this role, in terms of green hydrogen and electrolysis, there's a lot of, prospects, at least put into that arena. What's your thoughts on that? Is it something viable for Canada?
I would say yes, and let me tell you a little bit of a story. And going back to Anne-Marie's topic about the entrepreneurial mindset, Canada, this is not a known fact for many people. Canada owns the bragging rights to the development of electrolytic hydrogen. As back far in time as 1905, Alexander Stewart was the one that developed the concept of producing hydrogen from the Niagara Falls. Only today, they have broken ground and they're working on that project. Atura Power is developing that project. So Canada has a lot of IP developed, a lot of research, a lot of talent in the space, in the hydrogen space, same as the nuclear space. So a lot of the hydrogen safety knowledge in Canada comes from the Canadian nuclear laboratories, because they needed heavy water, which is an isotope of hydrogen, for the reactors. So I do think that Canada has tremendous potential. obviously, to develop the hydrogen sector. Specifically, you ask about green hydrogen. That's hydrogen coming from wind and solar capabilities. There are a number of major projects being developed in some areas in Canada, namely the East Coast and the West Coast. But Canada also has a lot of knowledge when it comes to CCUS, carbon sequestration, utilization and storage. So there's a lot of projects that can produce not green, but low carbon. The color is blue. In Alberta. So every province in Canada can compete, and every province has a competitive advantage to bring to the table. Ontario can bring the nuclear hydrogen. The color is considered pink, but it can also bring renewable hydrogen, right? So all of those contribute to low carbon production of hydrogen.
Excellent. Thank you, Yvette. Thank you for highlighting all the energy prospects that we can have. John, if I can get back to you on the digital adoption and AI and data centers and others on that. All of this infrastructure and capability requires the underpinning of it is semiconductors. It's an interesting topic that I want to address and see your thoughts on that. How do we play in this arena? Are we giving it enough thoughts, given that there are few and far between, countries that have that, from Holland to South Korea, to Taiwan to others? How do we play and how do we assert our position in that environment?
Everybody is looking at supply chains more closely than ever before. And we see people talking about a sovereign AI capability for Canada. And we try to tease that out and have a conversation. Well, what does that exactly mean? And when I think about all the different pieces that go into an AI solution, it really starts, as you mentioned, with the chip making machines that are only built in Netherlands. And so if you want to make chips, you have to buy that chip making machine from the Netherlands. And it's a fantastic beast. It has a laser that's in the basement, and then on the second floor, it actually etches the chips. And so, that is unique in the marketplace. Then you need to build some chips. And you think about one of the graphics cards that has the GPUs on it. That has hundreds of chips on it. So not just a big graphics card, but it has supporting cards and whatnot. Then you have the networking chips there because, believe it or not, there's a high performance communication that's required between all these things. And it's really unimaginable, the speeds, like a terabit per second between the chips now. And you can't do that over your local phone connection. Then you have to have the backplanes, you have to have the racks, the servers. So there's all these different pieces that fit into the complexity of these solutions. Not to mention then the power requirements, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, the battery backups, the diesel backups, and data and all those pieces. And so I think it's important that we tease out all those different elements, and then we pick those spots where we say, this is where it's critically important for Canada to demonstrate leadership. And we might decide that it's on the chip making, but we may also decide that our friends in the Netherlands are great friends, and we'll work with them to include that within our diplomatic conversations, right? And so we do need to tie our aspirations around economic impact and what we're building locally along with our diplomatic conversations with others to make sure that we have multiple sources of supply if something's very important to us, and then to be able to really demonstrate how we're going to demonstrate that leadership. And so, that's the way that we're approaching the marketplace. We've got the good fortune that when we look at short supply of certain items, we can commission that to have them built as well, right? And so for ourselves, we're building our own graphics processors, the GPUs, because we feel that that's a place that's important for us for the future of our company. And so, we need to ask ourselves those questions here in Canada.
But do you think, John, that we should carve a niche for us, apart from I like the idea of partnering with other countries because these fabs are incredibly costly and the $10 billion and so forth. But should we carve a niche for us in specific chips that are AI quantum based, given that really we own a lot of the critical minerals, in Canada? So your thoughts on that?
I think there's areas where we should be bold and leap forward. Quantum is one of those areas, and we see, with D-Wave or Photonics and other companies that are doing great things with that. I think about kind of that next generation of AI. I was on a panel with Jordy Rose, former CEO of Sanctuary.ai, and they make robotics and healthcare robotics. And so, he suggests that the next wave of AI is going to be on the physical application of AI through robotic systems. And so is that a spot where we want to invest and say, here's where Canada can lead because of our excellence? And so, again, it's picking our spots and seeing where we can grow that. And it's bringing that talent in as well. So growing our own individual talent, and then bringing in talent as well to help inform them and keeping that talent here. A good friend of mine, Michele Mosca from University of Waterloo, the Institute for Quantum Computing, he bemoans the fact that he has a lot of great students that come through his program, and then they go back home to nations elsewhere. And he'd love to be able to keep them here in Canada to continue to grow out that capability. And it's a really hard conversation to have around how do we maintain that talent in the region.
Excellent, thank you. Suman, do you have input on that, or the same question to you about the semiconductors, but also I want to go back on the R&D aspect from the private industry. Is how do we entice it? Is it tax credits? Is it investments? What are the incentives to get the industry also to put more, as much as government? Definitely, we have to increase, because R&D, and we said innovation ultimately is the essence of any high-performing economy, to position ourselves in the future. Any thoughts on that? Before I want to go back to you and Anne-Marie and others on the talent aspect as well. But your thoughts?
And I think, yes, Waterloo and quantum is possibly another area of strength of Canada. It's yet to be harnessed, I guess, to its fullest potential, but yes, he's a leader in the world. Talking about the semiconductor, I think everybody in the panel, if not already read it, and in the audience, there's a book which was possibly the best book in 2022 by Dr. Chris Miller on the chip war. I think it lays out very pragmatically, very factually, analytically, that if any country wish to become Taiwan 2.0, what's the imperatives and what's the lead time? And Namir, unfortunately, the given equations, investments, and attitude, and the policies that we have, I don't think in the next 15 years will be even 1/4 of Taiwan, even with the best of the intention. There has to be a systemic overhauling of how we do it. Look at the supply side of it. Yes, we do have critical minerals to do it. The immediate next step is the accessibility of it and the capital to harness it. We don't have it. So there's a much more economic and policy matter to be resolved first before we go to that. Give an example, which is, I think I shared in this group. If I have to export an Ontario rare earth or critical minerals to Far East to supply to that market, that will become in today's economics almost impractical and infeasible. So you have to design a very comprehensive thing on that to become the semiconductor. Is it a critical thing to be self-reliance? Yes, it is. For many countries, not just for Canada. So that needs way more deeper thinking and very, very long-term view to harness to that. Do we have the technology and the education and the skill ecosystem to actually do it after it is harnessed and get to the market or ready for that? Yes, we do have. So that's the positive side of it. I will come back to the productivity question. So the best part of Canada is we have many ecosystems which is not kind of either integrated or harnessed properly. If you talk about even AI, there's a lot of work being done, and there are 5 institutions which are doing very, very leading work in this area. If you are not aware of the names, it is Element AI, recently acquired by ServiceNow. Then we have Vector Institute, Montreal Institute of Learning and Algorithms, Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute, University of Toronto's Machine Learning Group, and we have celebrities and I would say almost the world leaders in Jeffrey Hinton, Joshua Bengio, and Richard Sutton, whose work is contributing to this. But the gap is: are we harnessing it for the right reasons? Are we making it marketable? And how do we do it from your point of view? Again, I'll come back to that. We need to look into two dimensions of it. We want to accelerate and foster the adoption in the government-influenced ecosystems. Not many countries have so much of government and citizen services in the entire equation of the GDP. 30% of information technology spent in Canada also is by government. So that adoption has to come in from that side. Particularly, I think my focus area would be: how do we improve healthcare and biotech? How do we include agriculture? How do we include personalized learning education system by invoking AI adoptions? And then as a throughput to that, as a kind of small and medium businesses will come in. We cannot expect, and it is the same story. Like if you talk about the year 2000, if a company of 50 people wanted to put up a website, it will be infeasible for them because average cost of creating a website would have been $15,000 at that time. But today, individually, I can put my advertisement as a paralegal advisor or as an education advisor in Google for $300 a month. So that economics is working. So if we are expecting that 98% of or 50% of the small and medium businesses will voluntarily do something to adopt it and enhance the charter of the AI adoption, I don't think it will happen. There has to be incentive to do that, or there has to be imposition on the other side of it, which they leverage upon that users. So for example, in absence of any better example, let's say if I take the example of CRA, if I make such that everybody has to put something automatically and through some tools for CIA filings, it becomes a requirement to do that. Because we have seen in the online applications and others, we have seen the great disruption of the COVID, how the entire passport application or citizenship application has become almost 100% virtual and digitally enabled. To address the productivity, again, it has to be a very sectoral view. I have a little different view about when you call out every time that Canada has a productivity issue. Canada will have a productivity issue. It's what benchmark we are doing. We cannot go to the Atlantic Ocean and fish, lobsters for 12 months. The job is defined to be 4 months. So you cannot have a productivity at par with any other fishing industry across the world where you can actually harvest 12 months with the same input. So we have to take a very sectoral view and see how we can push the charter for the AI adoption and make it an excellence, like an energy, like in food processing, like in research on food, and a few other sectoral areas, and then uplift the entire thing.
No, that's great. I mean, you've tackled many aspects, and and all of you tackled many aspects on the productivity and commercialization. I can't help but think, is there a role for, like in other countries that we mentioned, government also supports SMEs in their first development of capabilities. So by adopting or buying into some of the early concepts, they're helping commercialization in a way to do that, but also potentially some of the large companies and building the ecosystems in Canada and supporting this. I think it's a whole discussion that has to be done on the commercialization deficit and how do we address that going forward. But it's very interesting, all the thoughts that being brought up. So if I can ask the audience to put the, sorry, go ahead, Sumit.
No, I was saying that John, in the beginning itself, he actually charted a very good approach that for enterprises, and by enterprise I mean the larger ones, they will take a point approach, they will take an application approach, because that immediately correlates to their own productivity. I cannot take that point approach for a citizen service. It has to be much more comprehensive and entail the entire supply ecosystem for that to enable.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, that's great. If I can ask the audience to put the questions in the Q&A section rather than the webinar chat, will help us to do that. So please do. I'll ask another question, and then we'll look at the Q&A and see if there are any questions there. Going back on the talent agenda, it's a very critical agenda for the innovation aspect, a critical catalyst for to advance this, the innovation aspect in Canada. Anne-Marie, you mentioned about a culture of commercialization and helping the entrepreneurial aspect is something. How do you envisage that? What should take place? It's a very interesting area, actually, you're raising here.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, a few things. So yeah, to your point, we absolutely also view talent as one. It's like a critical foundational element to for businesses and wanting to advance any of these technologies in Canada, and building that pipeline of high quality, highly skilled talent is critical, and that's part of our role, of course, through our direct programming and through scholarships and fellowships. And we do have initiatives also that, to the point about entrepreneurship, we do have, I mentioned Lab to Markets. That's our kind of newest initiative around the entrepreneurial mindset. And that builds already on some fantastic work that's been done over the years by, the Lab to Market group and the I2I group at SFU. And so, this is kind of almost like something that started as almost like across Canada, we saw the need, or these institutions and organizations saw the need to start really building this talent, recognizing that this was going to be an important way for the talent pipeline to grow in Canada. And so, and then having the government make significant investments in that. So it's recognized that we want to be building this entrepreneurial mindset, and that requires very different skills than, especially for natural sciences and engineering students and researchers, what the skills that, of course, they're developing through carrying out research, through collaborating with industry and other partners. The entrepreneurial mindset is quite a different skill set. And so that is something that it's kind of early stages in some of our thinking at NSERC, but we do recognize that it's part of the path forward on where we need to go. And of course, there's other players in the ecosystem that are also thinking through this. MyTax, of course, supports work integrated learning opportunities, and also very much fosters a culture of entrepreneurship through supporting SMEs. So again, we don't think that we're doing this alone by any means. We want to be part of an active ecosystem in this space, not the ones who think that we're the only players, because our role is maybe slightly different than some of the ones that are really able to push on the entrepreneurship, but nonetheless, it's something that we've identified in our talent strategy. And this goes back all the way to this idea that not all PhDs are, for instance, going to become profs in the university system. So it's this much bigger conversation even around where do very highly skilled graduate students then go into their careers, and recognizing that these different avenues for their careers are emerging. And so we just want to, our role as a granting council, I think, is really trying to prepare that next generation as much as we can with our levers to be able to support that. But we're very, we're quite responsive when government priorities are outlined about where we can really push the dial. We do, like we've talked about quantum, we have very extensive partnerships internationally and nationally around quantum that include talent. So we are, we operating from a very broad base. We try and support as much as we can. And yeah, it's it is interesting, and we try and narrow that gap between the idea of discovery or applied research. It's kind of researchers as well don't, they're also through their discovery research advancing innovations as well and entrepreneurship. So it's very broad based, and we recognize that there's a need for it.
Good for you. Good for you.
Yeah.
Actually, to build on that, Anne-Marie, so one of the questions that I'm reading here is quite an interesting one. It says, as Canada navigates rapid digital transformation, what specific actionable strategies can be implemented by governments, businesses, and educational institutions to effectively upskill individuals with weaker digital proficiencies and ensure they are not left behind? It's an interesting one because, in fact, even with all the trade dynamics and the changing labor market and the changing dynamics of our environment, it is possible that the hardest hit will be those that have the least knowledge of digital and digital technologies. They're not the STEM individuals, they're not the computer system engineers and others, where those continue to need reskilling and upskilling because this technology evolves fast. But it's almost bordering on the essential digital skills. How do we make sure that everybody has embraced digital technologies and able to work in commerce, shop floor, whatever that requires digital technologies. Anybody would like to answer that question?
Maybe I could just add just one point on that. So we're also aware, of course, that reskilling and upgrading skills is needed, and there's different organizations emerging to fill that gap. But I also want to give a nod to the college sector and being quite able to rapidly pivot some programming into helping with upskilling and that. So I'd want to acknowledge their role as well in the innovation ecosystem in that way.
It's an interesting question. We have an audacious goal to skill 1.6 million people in Canada on AI this year, and so we're working hard to get there. But equally audacious, what I told our skilling lead was, what about those embedded AI solutions? I recall a conversation I had in Kitchener-Waterloo with a carpenter who told me that AI wasn't something in his near future. He didn't like math. He doesn't have the data to do anything with AI, and so he doesn't know even why he was invited to come talk. He was just really just interested in hearing what the conversation was about. We explored this a little bit further, and I asked him if he used a wayfinding application to find his way to our meeting that day. And he says, "Oh my goodness, do I ever rely upon that wayfinding application? I get to my customers quickly and easily. I avoid traffic. It saves me a half hour to an hour every day because I use this tool." Well, that's using AI. He uses voice to text as he's driving so that he's safe when he drives. That's AI. He translates things. That's AI. It's autocomplete. That's AI. And so really, I think you're going to see an explosion of these AI-enabled tools. There was a question around, how do we see these tools integrating into the environment? There's a startup here in Ottawa called ContextAir, and they put large language models in front of very complex technical guides. So imagine you're trying to fix an aircraft engine, and you see this little widget on the side of it, and you wonder what that does. You think it's broken. So you can then ask the question, what does this widget do here at this location on this aircraft engine? And it'll understand that question, provide you an exploded diagram, give you the specifications right in the manual so that you can get to knowledge faster and complete your job faster. Will the technician see that as AI? Maybe, but I suggest to you that's just another tool. And so really, I think it's this idea of leveraging AI to change the way that we do our work across the board. AI for physicians, AI for lawyers, AI for the shopkeeper, AI to do your books, right? And these things complement individuals. And I think that's where, the focus is. We do have the luminaries around Yoshua Bengio and Jeffrey Hinton who've done that hard lifting around the tools and the models. But really, it's now application of those models. Since GPT came out, there's been thousands of models that have been created. And so do we need to create more models, or do we need to put those models to use in ways that help accelerate our economy?
In fact, it's one of the areas that we're looking at as an organization is how do we help enterprises? Because there's a difference between, developing the talent to, if you look at the cloud, to design the cloud, and there's a different training that has to be done for those that want to leverage the cloud, not design it. And the same with AI. Ultimately, there's a lot of knowledge to be built in Canada to help that adoption capability that has to happen. So there's a whole landscape that needs to be done there. Any other thoughts before I jump into another question?
I wanted to double down on Anne-Marie's conversation on entrepreneur studies. The government of Canada had a groundbreaking program for the superclusters, innovation superclusters, picking our spots around oceans, proteins-based innovation, so agriculture, digital, supply chain, and manufacturing. And they brought together industry and government to really try to build new innovation. And I was fortunate enough to be responsible for Microsoft's role within those superclusters. But what was astounding to me was some of the proposals that came forward weren't able to describe the minimum viable product. And so they came forward with huge asks for money, lots of equipment, lots of time. And when we asked them, well, can you do this in 6 months with smaller amount of resources to demonstrate customer value? they were almost like a deer in the headlights because they didn't have that entrepreneurial background, that experience there. And then when we asked about potential business models, these were physical, real world examples, not tech examples. These were, building out real world equipment and things. That wasn't there either, and they couldn't come up with subscription model, one-time payment, or things like that. And so that's where the entrepreneurial education comes in, and we have pockets that do that across the country. But I think we need to lean in a little bit further with that. And anybody that can mentor young startups, take that opportunity. It's a lot of fun. You don't have to put your own sweat equity into the game, and probably not a lot of money either. But to be able to just give gentle nudge to these innovators that are sometimes a little bit headstrong, but got their idea and their passion, that can help go a long way.
Excellent. Any other thoughts from any of the
Yeah,
panelists?
if I may, I wanted to quickly react to what John mentioned and to what Suman you mentioned earlier about adoption of AI for SMEs to make them more competitive. Namir, you'll be happy to hear that I've been talking to your team precisely about that. I mentioned that, say, the nuclear industry has, big legacy and many years of experience, but we do things a certain way. So how do we modernize? And all those 89,000 jobs, 8,500 jobs in medical isotopes, if all these projects were to get to fruition tomorrow, that's a lot more workers that we need, from welders and pipe fitters to engineers. So how do we retool perhaps other workers from other spaces in other manufacturing areas to get into the nuclear space? And how do we get the nuclear companies or those suppliers to the nuclear companies, most of which are SMEs, to get more agile through the use of AI? And then we've been talking to a number of potential partners about how do they learn to use all these little systems that John and Suman were talking about, that doesn't require an SME to be a developer, but a user, right? So how do we now become savvy users of all these tools that are going to increase our productivity? And we didn't mention this, but we mentioned that Canada, well, 36 million people, is a relatively small market. So how do we help these SMEs thrive, stay here, and the talent to stay here, but also becoming an exporter of these technologies that we produce here, right? And then the world is our oyster and our market expands, but we don't lose our companies, they stay here, and we don't lose our PhDs and engineers and highly qualified tradespeople, right? And they stay here. So I think that's also an important notion to explore and think about how AI can help our companies be more competitive in the global arena.
So it's very interesting because, thank you for that. I mean, so far what I've heard, I mean, there's so many questions, but so far what I've heard is that, we've got to pick our game, as John mentioned, in terms of what do we do about the semiconductors and what do we do about the development of technology and others. Should we have leadership in energy, as you mentioned, Yvette? How do we create a culture of commercialization within the entrepreneurs and something, it begs a question. It sounds like we're weaving some kind of the skeleton of an industrial strategy. What's your thoughts on that? Suman?
Yeah. So when you talk about this, first of all, my favorite line is technology has never seen any recession, and it will never see any recession either. So anything invested in technology will always have positive returns. It is about the appetite of it, that how much and when, as an enterprise, as an institution or government, I do in that. So on the industrial policy and others, if you look into it, what we are discussing here, one is an N- phase, like the startup phase, where we are thinking to put our effort and money for future proofing, for creating excellence, for creating Canada strength positions. And the other one is the adoption of it. So for whatever already is there in the near future or here, how do I make my workforce be skill retooled to adopt to that? If I take these two lines, Today we have 300 to 400, if my knowledge is correct, 300 to 400 startups in Canada only focusing on AI applications. Now, let's not debate about the number is more or less or whatever it is, but fundamentally, I do not see a very comprehensive strategy to foster that 300 to 400 so that at least I have 10% of them producing something to a power position of Canada. So when we design the next phase, and hopefully by Monday evening we'll have a new government. And if you go to, I don't want to get in the political discussion, but if you look into the political platforms or the election platforms, none of them, unfortunately, said that what they're doing for fostering and accelerating innovation. I see housing, I see affordability. I do not see innovation the way it is needed. Anyway, so one part of it is, let's take a very objective example, because one of the questions is what we can do objectively. This 300 to 400 AI-focused startups, leaving aside the others, what do we do to these ecosystems so that they produce 400 patents, which puts Canada into a pedestal of strength? The other part is possibly an easier part, the tradesman training, the common people training for adoption. I think that is also a two-pronged approach. One is how we cater the education ecosystem. We do in ICTC, there are many forums which can enable that so that we can use more and more technology in our way. And you know what? Everybody carries many tools today, your handymans. They adopt it as the tools come in for their own survival. So it becomes an involved voluntary adoption. We can fast track that by having some vocational trainings and others. Come to the enterprises like us, in the introduction, we said 9,700 people. My biggest challenge is how do I keep up with this workforce to cater to my customers on the new needs? But that will happen because that is a survival element for me. So I'll do that. Enterprises will do that for their trainings. What we can do as a policy, can we, again, coming back to that N-1, and even with an enterprise ecosystem, is Microsoft is doing something for Canada. Can we accelerate it by fostering it, by incentivizing? So the industry strategy need to focus way more than it is today into making these things much more powerful and meaningful and objective going forward to give us a power position. I don't see it in either of the election platforms.
John, I see you ready to intervene. No? Okay. It's interesting.
No, not at that one.
No. It's interesting. I was in Europe on, on two panels actually in discussion for AI, the development of robotics, automation, something. And obviously as many countries coming together, but they also reflecting on how to build that collectively and what would be the needs in terms of investment, talent, what industries they need to focus on, how to develop it. So I think we're not alone in our approach in trying to reflect how do we position Canada in this changing trade dynamics. Listen, I think we're coming to an end. We could have gone for another hour of discussions, but we've come to the end of the session. So I'd like to thank you for all your insights and your input into this. There was a lot of nuggets of information and policy advice here to do that. I will be reviewing the video again to capture some of these thoughts. I've certainly learned a lot from this discussion. So very much appreciate your time and your input and your insights into this. And I will hand it back to Mirdad.
Thank you very much, Namir, and the panelists for a very insightful conversation and discussions and a lot of questions, actually. That was very dynamic. And Trudy, if you could please spotlight me, thank you, along with others. I appreciate that. It was a very good panel. Thank you for that. I think we are supposed to have the last poll for the participants. Okay, so that's the one actually. So maybe that's not the last one. This is the demographic poll. This, I appreciate if participants fill this out. It's always helpful for us to understand and to do better in future for the demographic as well as the quality of the panel and any thoughts that you may have. A couple of housekeeping announcements that, as you may know, for the next CSPC conference, which is happening in November 19 to 21st. We accept panel submissions. The deadline is May the 2nd. Only 1 week left to that. Please feel note that everyone is welcome to submit a panel proposal for the conference. And that's number one. Number two is that the next virtual panel is happening on May the 7th, 11:30 a.m. to 1 Eastern Time. Very interesting panel, screen time and the developing brain, research benefits, risks, and policy. This panel is organized by Brain Canada Foundation. I highly recommend those of you, especially with teenagers at home, to attend this panel. There will be a lot of learning, I guess, for us, for everyone. And as I mentioned, the Innovation Strategy Series panel, the next panel will take place on May the 21st on the agri-food sector. The detailed information will be announced. And once again, I want to thank everyone, John, Anne Mary, Yvette, Suman, and especially Namir for the collaboration of ICTC, and look forward for future collaborations. And there you go, the last question for everyone. How did you like the panel? Please reply to this poll. I appreciate that. And very much to look forward to hear from everyone, your comments, your suggestions for future, and having the panelists on future events. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a good
Cheers.
weekend.